Hello, hello. Anybody there? Welcome to the Reason We Learn livecast on this Thursday. What is today? It's the end of the month, I think. Oh my gosh, I don't even know what date it is. April 29th. Holy cow. Okay, so welcome to everyone. Today, I am privileged to have a guest with us from the San Diego Unified School District, or formerly with them. I met Caitlin Stivaletta on Twitter, and the way that we met is kind of interesting. I was doing research about how the American schools function and so forth. And while I was researching the Department of Education, I came across information about Cindy Marten. She is Biden's nominee for Deputy Secretary of Education. And I wanted to get some more information. I knew that she was controversial. So I went and put an open post out on Twitter for any information anybody could share with me so I could better understand what's going on with her. And that's when Caitlin contacted me and she shared a blog post with me and I knew we had to speak. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Caitlin Stivaletta. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Deb. It's nice to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. So good day so far. You're on the West Coast, so it's earlier.
Yes, I'm still in San Diego, so it's about 11 o'clock here.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Right. Beautiful California, if only they'd left it that way. Right.
Yes.
Like perfect
right.
weather, except for like everything else.
That's why I moved here, Deb, because I thought the education system was great. College was really cheap. And by the time I made it here, things changed. So.
Yeah. Well, you know, what's interesting, I did discover in my research, there is more information about the California schools online than pretty much any other district or any other state's districts in the country. You know, if you are searching for information just in general about how American schools function, there are entire websites devoted only to the California schools because it's that big, that complex, that many people. I mean, California is almost a country unto itself. So, you know, that I found fascinating. I covered San Diego schools briefly in my early days as a YouTuber when y'all changed the grading. That was one of the first things I noticed that was going, oh, we're not going to be marking homework that's late as a problem. And, you know, a separate grade for your behavior and things. Were you still working with them when that took place?
No, I think that kind of came through at the end of the pandemic because they were scrambling and trying to figure out, like, how do we mark achievement here? Kids are barely showing up. It was one of those situations. So that happened last year. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, so why don't you tell our viewers a little more about yourself, who you are, what you know, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. So my name's Caitlin Stivaletta. I have worked in California as a teacher since 2011. I started my career, much like Cindy Marten, in the Poway Unified School District, which is one of the most distinguished and highly regarded districts in our state. So I got a really great experience there, a really great teacher training there. And then in 2013, there were some budget cuts going on and some shuffling around with teachers. And so I decided to give San Diego Unified a go in regards to establishing a permanent position. And so that just so happened to be the exact same year that Cindy Marten was appointed as the new superintendent. So she and I have a storyline and a narrative that sort of aligns in regards to the current situation and how events have unfolded up until now. So
and what is that?
Well, so when I first started working in San Diego Unified, there were, budget cuts. And teachers who were tenured upwards of about 9 years, I believe, were getting pink slips. And so there was really no chance that I would be getting hired. And so that's when I believe Cindy started to make some decisions and move things around that we can talk about in a little bit regarding English language learners and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. During that time also, there was some legislative things going on regarding dual immersion education, Prop 58, and that really kind of changed the landscape of education in our district.
Can you tell the audience a little bit more about what that specifically is as far as immersion and Prop 58?
Yeah, so in California particularly, dual language education has always been a very political issue. And prior to 2016, it had been actually completely banned. Like we couldn't even teach it in public schools. And then that completely shifted. So Prop 58 was basically passing this assembly bill that would make it possible for public schools to provide a dual immersion education, and it was going to be funded by grant funding. So that means that any districts with schools that dedicated themselves to developing this dual immersion model were receiving extra funding in order to provide these types of services. Mm-hmm. But with that happening, then teachers with, BCLAD, dual language authorization on their credentials, they became priority in the district. So at the time, in 2011, when I got my teaching credential, I was considered highly qualified. I got my master's degree in best practice theory, and I was desperately trying to get hired in a full-time position. But due to seniority and things of that nature, I just couldn't get in. So as time moved on, technology began advancing, mathematics and science began to pick up steam. And so I had done everything I needed to do except clear my credential. And so then it got to this point where suddenly even though I was highly qualified, I'd had years with the district, I was a good teacher, good performance reviews, I still couldn't get hired and get a permanent contract because now the district was able to just hire whoever they wanted based on their need. And that would be teachers that had add-on credentials for mathematics and science and dual immersion. And so I was kind of getting boxed out in regards to that because of this assembly bill that passed. And while that's fine because it was voted in, to me, something didn't seem right. It didn't seem like that's how things should happen, and be able to hire teachers who had absolutely no years of experience being provided full-time permanent probationary contracts that turn into permanent after 2 years.
So they just got the credential and were hired right in, even though they didn't have actual experience in the classroom.
That's correct. Okay. And part of what I brought up that I noticed was that, let me try to explain this. If a brand new teacher was authorized in dual immersion, like they were authorized to teach Spanish, if they were a brand new teacher, the district would then offer them a probationary contract, and they would fund their induction program, which was something that we have to do here in order to clear your credential with the state, which by all rights, professionally speaking, I have to do it on my own. So it's a perk if a district will provide that for you. So these teachers were doing that, and then the district didn't provide the resources or the materials to teach in a dual immersion school. So these teachers had to do all the translating themselves. They were getting really burnt out. And after they got a permanent position, they were free in the seniority pool to choice and post and bid into English-only positions. And so what I noticed, and I think was possibly happening, was that these teachers would then move into an English-only position after they've been hired for having a dual language credential, thus opening up more positions to hire more. So there were leave replacement teachers like myself that were just going through this cycle of upheaval and not knowing, what grade level you were going to work at, what school you were going to work at, if you were even going to get a contract the next year, for years with no end in sight.
Wow. So. And the impact to the children. Because when people hear this, the part of my brain that still remembers being a classroom teacher and having a credential, like I kind of get what that must have been like for you. Okay. But I think a lot of the people watching are probably saying, that sounds like it sucked for you, but how does that back up on the kids? Like, what does that mean in terms of classroom education quality? What does that do to the learning experience?
A lot for the kids, because you're getting a teacher that might not be familiar with the curriculum. They may have been teaching 5th grade the year before. Now they're suddenly teaching kindergarten. There's no consistency in the school. A teacher may be there for 1 year and the kids look up and they go, next year I'm going to have this teacher. And, they've already built a relationship with this person through just recess and just other extracurriculars that we teachers do. We try to connect with all students on our campuses, right? And so then they look forward to that. They build a relationship with you. And then all of a sudden, poof, teacher's gone. Where's the teacher going to be next year? Plus, the way it's happening here in San Diego is that the communities that have the most challenging students to teach, the marginalized communities, they're getting a lot of teachers taking leaves of absence. And so they're getting a lot of teachers who are basically leave replacement, coming in for 1 year, 2 years possibly, and then they're moving. So there's absolutely no consistency. There's no way to build anything there. And particularly for those communities, it is a huge problem. They're, by all rights, a leave replacement teacher should be the very best teacher. They should be the teacher that can do anything. They're the jack of all trades. That they should not just be the teachers that the district just go, well, maybe they'll get a contract if we feel like it next year. They should be the best of the best who can go into these adverse situations and just knock it out of the park and do an amazing job and just make those communities flourish. But that's not what's happening at all.
Okay. All right. So just for those who are listening, part of why I've asked Caitlin to go into this is that we're trying to understand what's going on with public education in general and understand that Cindy Marten was in charge of this district. Okay. So what Caitlin's doing is she's painting a picture for us of a district that is already highly politicized by virtue of language. Okay. So when you have this issue where we're voting to have certain preferences as far as what people are credentialed to teach, you're having teachers chosen for political reasons, not skill-based reasons. That backs up on the kids in that they're getting somebody in their classroom is not there because of skill. They're there because it satisfied somebody's, look, I've got people with this credential. I care political aspirations, and it's not really translating into outcomes for the children, which is what it's supposed to do. If you're going to put a policy forward in education, there should be some evidence that it's going to translate into positive outcomes for kids. Okay. So laying this groundwork is not minutia. It's not wasting time in the conversation. It is making clear that this is a system-wide issue that does get down into those weeds. It's not as simple as, oh, well, just get a different person in and everything's fine. The personality at the top makes a difference because they do set an agenda, but you've got all kinds of moving parts that require that person to be extra virtuous. It's not just somebody who's competent. You now need somebody who's going to come in and say, we're not playing this political game. We're not doing this. We're putting the kids first. And you know what? That might look strange to you because we're not going to fixate too much on this particular credential. We're going to make sure we have experienced teachers in every classroom, but that's what we're going to do. And it sounds like that didn't happen. It sounds like it was more like red meat for somebody's political base, and the kids are getting short shrift in the end, right? Am I understanding correctly?
I mean, that's the way, yeah, I would say you have it correct. That's the way I see it, at least.
Okay.
Yep.
So I had to address that because it's like, there's a commenter saying like, oh, let's get down into minutia. And I'm like, yeah, but this is important. This is why people sit there going, how does this happen? Why is it so bad? Why are kids not reading? Why are they not learning math? What's actually the reason? And it's too easy to say, well, the teachers are bad at their job, or, there's too many of, disciplinary problems in the classroom. It's not like that. The incentives are in the wrong place for who goes where and why, and it's politics, right?
It's 100% politics. And when this all happened and everything kind of came together, and I started investigating and doing my homework and going, how is this happening? Where are the systemic fissures here that are creating this? Because we need to go deeper. We need to go farther back to see like what exactly is going on either between the unions and the CTA and the NEA law. Like how far back do we have to go? Number one, you always have to follow the money, right? So this has to do with Title I funds and following, is this money that is provided by the federal government in order to satisfy, the 14th Amendment for these kids? Is it following the student directly like it's supposed to? And the fact is, no, it's not. And so it always comes down to money. And so one of the things that happened with Cindy that I kind of wanted to speak to has to do with our Spanish-speaking population. And she, we talked about this earlier, but when Cindy was appointed to superintendent, it was in violation of the Brown Act here in California.
What is the Brown Act in California?
The Brown Act it makes it so that there has to be a certain amount of notice, and so that these meetings have to occur in public. And so
it's like a sunshine law, right?
Yeah, and it's not really heavily enforced. It's one of those things with a law that it's not it's a law, but it has to be enforced by the public. And, it wasn't, and it is what it is. But the fact is, she was appointed in violation of the Brown Act. It was in a closed door session. I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm just going to pull my notes up right here just so I can make sure that it's clear. But, here it says the Brown Act guarantees the public's right to attend and participate in meetings of local legislative bodies. It was enacted in response to mounting public concerns over informal, undisclosed meetings held by local elected officials. So what happened with Ms. Marten is that on the very same day that the former superintendent announced that he had plans to step down, the school board had a closed door session meeting, and it's a very long session, and they came up with Cindy. Now, at the time, she was principal of Central Elementary School, and the way I like to look at it is, if you were applying for a job, you would look at a resume and you would, decide, does this person have the experience and the qualifications to run a very large school district?
It's very large.
It's the eighth largest in our country. It's the second largest in California.
Yeah.
And she hadn't even been principal of a high school, which has a significant student body population. So just even on paper, to me, I don't think that she had the qualifications. And that's reflected in a lot of the incompetent decisions that she made as a superintendent during her tenure there.
Well, it's interesting. I would be willing to bet, because I'm just becoming aware of it myself, that the average American doesn't really understand what a school superintendent is responsible for. Right? And you've just said that she was in charge. She was a principal of an elementary school, and not to disparage principals of elementary schools. But to your point, the student body is smaller. The budget is smaller. So, there's a wide variety of things that are smaller, less complex than you have to deal with. Now, superintendents have, just for a little education for my audience, you have responsibilities in that you answer to the board. So you're the person in charge administratively of making the board's mission and the board's directives into action in the district. That is your job. You're sort of like the CEO of the district. And just like a CEO in a company has a tremendous amount of responsibility, you've got financial responsibilities for setting the budget for the entire district and making sure all of that goes. Now, individual principals manage site budget, but the superintendent has to deal with all of that. You have to make sure that these Title I funds, for example, or any other funds that are coming from the federal government get spent, because you don't want to send them back. You don't want them left on the table. So they have to be spent, and they have to be spent appropriately on where they're supposed to go. They are earmarked for very specific activities. The list of financial responsibilities is quite long. Then on top of financial responsibilities, you've got lobbying responsibilities. You have to build community relations. You work with the media, relationships with other districts, right? Okay. I'm going through because I did slides about this, by the way. You're also responsible for building improvements, bond issues, district curriculum, district improvement, district policy, district reports, student transfers, and transportation. So the list of responsibilities is long. Like I said, you're CEO of the district, 8th largest district in the nation. And she was principal of an elementary school. Again, nothing against principals of elementary schools, but just think of the financial responsibilities alone. Mm-hmm. That requires, in my personal opinion, a resume of financial acumen that you don't necessarily get being principal of an elementary school, unless you became principal of elementary school after being the accountant or business manager or something for some very large corporation. Unlikely. Continue. I'm sorry. I just wanted to educate my audience because I think it'll help your comments have a lot more relevance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, basically what happened in regards to what you're saying, in 2013, the same year, Governor Jerry Brown signed in something called the Local Control Funding Formula. And this is legislation that basically allowed school districts to have more discretion and less transparency and accountability for how federal funds and dollars for education are spent. And so again, two things that aligned at the same time. Now,
someone with very little financial experience coming in to manage a gigantic district with a huge budget and a new policy that makes that a little less transparent than it ever was before.
Pretty much.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Continue.
So So during that time, there was a budget crisis and she had to try to make up for deficits. And yet there's like mounting pressure from teachers to increase pay because of everything else going on. So there's, bargaining going on with the union. And so there are teachers that are demanding, pay raises. Now the structure with that is interesting because, if you're looking at a 3% pay raise for, all of the teachers that are members of the whole district, a teacher that has been working for 17 years in the district and is higher on the pay scale, a 3% raise increase is significantly more than a brand new teacher at the bottom. It's not the same. So it's kind of unfeasible in many ways to be looking at things like that, but that's how they look at it. And so, even though the district couldn't afford these pay raises, they had to be approved. So, I believe they got approved. And so then you have to kind of move some funding around and try to make things work. And so what happened was at the time, we had something called English language support teachers. And these were kind of like the liaisons that would support non-native English speaking families. And so they would get the parents involved, they would go to the school sites, and they would really make sure that these children were, developing English and parents had a voice and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Typically the district funded these. So it was kind of like one of those things where the schools expected it, like a school nurse or a counselor. It was just kind of part of, how many students do you have enrolled? Okay, this is how many days, this is the FTE that you're going to have for this position. If a school site decided in their school site council meetings that they maybe wanted to add a day or, they would have these arrangements that just their local community, they would get to kind of decide where they would delineate this money. Occasionally they could decide if they wanted to have this support teacher a little bit more, that kind of a thing. Now, these meetings for the SSC, they happen in the spring.
What's the SSC?
The school site council meetings.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So that's where the parents get involved and some teachers. And so there's all these local stakeholders that come together to vote on these decisions. And so this will happen in the spring. But in June of, I believe it was 2013 or perhaps 2014, Cindy just decided to completely get rid of this program. So she eliminated this position. All of a sudden there was no English language support teachers anymore. And the schools weren't expecting it. So it's like she abolished the program and everybody was like, oh, wait a minute, we planned this spring for next year based on thinking that we were going to have this. And so all of a sudden there was no support teachers for these families.
And how were the families notified?
That I'm not sure of. Sure.
You are not sure if they were or how they were?
I don't know either. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what happened. I just know that the school sites themselves were expecting to have this position. It would be like saying, hey, I know you expected to have a school counselor next year, but now you're not. And they're going, well, but we really need that. That's like a really essential component for these kids and these families. But it makes sense that, maybe that would happen because, these families might not know the rules. They might not have a voice. They might not feel like they can speak up. So if you have to cut the budget, and you're making decisions, well, I mean,
so you're wondering if she cut there because it was a population of people who'd be least capable of fighting back, speaking up, or even noticing what was going on until it was too late?
Yeah.
Let's say the people with the least political power, perhaps. I mean, we don't know this for certain, but let's just say it seems interesting. It's an interesting correlation, right?
It's interesting. It's a little interesting.
What caused this budget crisis at the time? Like why did they have a shortfall in the first place, do you think?
Gosh, I'm not sure.
It's one of those things people talk about. We had a budget crisis, but then there's it's one of those things that people just say that it is, and we don't even know why. But it sounds like maybe the union demands for higher pay were probably stressing it if it already existed.
Part of it, I need to do a little bit more research on this, but I know that they were expecting it. The point is they have projections for the budget for years ahead, and so there was a projected $124 million deficit that they were aware of.
Gotcha.
And so you have to strategically try to make arrangements with that in mind, with that foresight. And I believe part of the issue was this wasn't being done. And then June came and it was like, uh-oh. And so this is kind of why, it happened in that time frame.
But if they were projecting the shortfall and they knew that far out, it certainly makes a closed door session to appoint a superintendent, which again is in violation of the Brown Act. It makes it even that much more sketchy, because wouldn't you be more keen to find the person who is a rock star with financial management, because you're projecting this big budget crunch and you know that you've got earmarked funds for Title I that absolutely must not only go to the right place, but they got to get spent. Like, you don't want that sitting on the table, like not being put in the right place, because if you don't spend it, it's got to go back. A lot of people don't realize that. And
right.
So it has to follow those kids. Like you said, it's their right. It's a federal program. If you're listening and you don't know what Title I is, but these are federal funds earmarked very specifically for these kids. And is it specifically for language learners, or is it for all special needs?
It covers
okay.
all of it.
It covers all.
There's probably different line items and whatnot, but
right.
yes.
But it's there because they cannot have an unfunded mandate. So the federal government cannot mandate free and equal education for these kids and then leave it to the states to have to come up with the money. So it's to prevent there being an unfunded mandate. And that is why the superintendents have such a responsibility to make sure they get the money to their district when they need it, and that it gets spent. It goes to the right places at the right time, so they're not left like where they're obligated by law to do something. You don't want to get sued and you don't have the money to pay for it. But that brings up another question. If it was redirected from Title I, let's just say if there's a possibility that it was, and that's why they cut these support teachers, because they didn't have the money for them. You would think that somebody somewhere would know, like there'd be somewhere there's a paper trail, right? Like, I mean, that the federal government, for example, who is responsible for auditing this, one would assume, because it's the money they send out there, that they know if it was spent the right way, if it was who said what to whom, to make sure, right?
Well, yeah, and the district got nailed for it. They got in trouble from the state because they were found to be out of compliance with our English language reclassification. And so that happened in 2019. That report came out and the district couldn't provide, essentially what you're saying, the evidence of how these funds were being spent to support second language learners.
And that is her responsibility.
Yes.
Because that falls, as I've described before, to the superintendent.
Yes.
So we're starting to paint a picture of a person who potentially was unqualified for their job, strangely appointed in a closed door session. Nobody really knows why. Then found to have mismanaged the funds of the district and took the district out of compliance with federal law and with state law.
State law. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's both. I mean, it's state law, but also if you take the money from the government and from the federal government and you don't do the right things with it, that's also a problem. And yet strangely is nominated to be Deputy Secretary of Education.
It doesn't make sense to me. I just can't make sense of it.
That does seem odd. I can't begin to speculate why.
No, and part of this goes along with what I was mentioning before about the Prop 58, because the district then, implemented all of these dual immersion programs. And I don't know, I wonder if maybe there was a thought that this was going to, do a better job of reclassifying students. And so we didn't have to do ELD anymore, which is English language development, because we weren't provided curriculum for it anyway in the classroom. I don't really know what happened those 2 years with the English language development. There really wasn't anything going on.
But it seems like you should have known. Am I crazy? Like, I mean, these are the things that ought to have been made known.
They should have been. Yeah. I
mean, I don't know. It seems like, you have a large population of English as a second language learners, right? And you probably were eligible for a sizable sum in Title I funds for them and every other special need, correct? So when you were there, like, did you start asking questions? Did you, try to get to the bottom of what's going on, especially as it impacted you? And then what happened?
It just wasn't really well received. I was a part of the school site council meeting at my site, and I didn't know a lot about it. And so I just started asking questions saying, well, I was at a dual immersion school that had an English only department and a dual immersion department. And a majority of the Title I students were in the English only department, which I found interesting since the dual immersion program was meant to support these students themselves. And so I just was wondering, in my community, I had less parent support, and the dual immersion side had a lot of parents choicing in to this program who would support the PTA and provide all these enrichment things.
They don't know what choicing in means. I think you need to explain what choicing in means, right? Because you have students, for the audience, you have students who literally speak Spanish and they're trying to learn English, but they're dual immersion, so they are getting Spanish and English, correct? And then they're speaking both languages. Choicing in, as I understand it, is your student is an English speaker, native English speaker, but you want them to speak Spanish, so you want them to be in a classroom immersed in Spanish, and so you're putting kids who really don't specifically need dual immersion because they already speak English, right? And they could take Spanish outside of school or wait till middle school or something like that. And they're putting them into this program that is, at least I would imagine, partially funded with Title I funds.
The grant money. Well, the Title I funds that directed itself at the school itself, right? But the school also received the grant funding for the dual immersion program. So I was just questioning, should a majority of the Title I funds be going to support the English only department? I didn't know. I was just asking questions, and nobody was really answering them for me. But it didn't seem right to me because my kids needed more support, and they didn't have the parent support that the other students were receiving, in addition to benefiting from the Title I funds that kind of blanketed themselves across the school site. And this was all based on the legislation. It's okay to do, but I would just kept saying, well, is this okay? This doesn't seem right because my students are still unsupported. And it wasn't well received because dual immersion programs are presented as glowing. And I just kept saying, I don't think equity is, middle-class families choicing into a Title I school to learn Spanish by capitalizing on children that need to learn English, kind of a thing. Like it just doesn't seem right to me. It doesn't. And not to mention, from what I've been told through just my own personal research, many immigrant families, they want their children to learn English as quickly as possible. And in the dual immersion model, they don't learn it as quickly. And
especially if half the class are students trying to speak Spanish.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and in certain schools, they'll do a 90-10 split. So that would mean, like in kindergarten, 90% of the instruction is in Spanish and then 10% English. And so what was happening for me, particularly at this one site, which I think was just a lens, was that children who were not thriving due to learning challenges or behavioral issues were then being moved out of the dual immersion program and coming over to the English only department with years of not even being taught how to read and write in English. They've been learning in the dual immersion side, and so then they would just get choiced into the other side. And so I was getting inundated with IEPs and just very difficult children to teach, just based on the nature of they weren't able to learn two languages. And so, obviously the parents have the choice to then remove them and put them into a side where they don't have to learn Spanish anymore. But it made it almost impossible for me to do my job because,
they also didn't know English.
Yeah.
Okay. So somebody is asking here, wouldn't the removal of that program, the support program that they ended, affect mostly minorities?
Wouldn't the removal of that program affect mostly minority people? What program? I'm not quite sure what.
When you said that they ended the support, where they had the teacher supports for the English language learners, where they just ended the program and didn't explain what was going on. I think he's referring to that.
Would that mostly affect minority people? Yes. That's who it affected. Yeah.
Right. So has anyone said, like, that seems a little, if you're talking about outcomes, if, the big focus of equity is like, that seems the opposite of that. Yeah? Has that been said about her? That, like, seems an odd pick when the focus is on uplifting and improving outcomes for minority students.
Well, yeah, and I think it's reflected in the state noticing that and the district falling out of compliance, because then the district put it down back on the teachers that we needed to then do, 40 minutes of this thing called designated ELD in an already, just tight schedule. All teachers know that you can barely fit the instructional time in that you need. But then all of a sudden it was like our fault that these children were not reclassifying. And so then we had to carve out the more time and go to all these trainings. And I just kept thinking, well, but what about a couple years ago when she eliminated the English language support teachers? Is that where it began? And is this why students are now not reclassifying as much? As it maybe does it not have to do with the teachers so much as that decision there was sort of the beginning of sort of a series of events that kind of led up to this, because something doesn't seem right.
So you sort of feel like the blame was falling on teachers and it should have fallen a lot higher up the food chain. And yet again, there's Cindy Marten. It makes you wonder. It's like, what magical properties does she have that it just seems to like I said, I don't understand it. I don't get why she was chosen in the first place. I don't get why when you fall out of compliance, you get promoted. It's like, how does that?
Well, and then when you're a teacher and you speak out about it because you care about your kids and you're just wanting to know, you're like, this doesn't seem right. What happened? I got blacklisted from the district. I got an email at the end of, after COVID happened. I was a leave replacement teacher, even though I was teacher of the year at my site the year before. I was on the California Teacher Association think tank. It was an institute for teaching where we were brainstorming ways that we could, have education progress and whatnot. I was very active, very involved. I'd been retained at the same school site for 3 years, luckily. By lucky stars. I was a 4th and 5th grade teacher, and then I had to move down to TKK, and then I moved back up to 4th and 5th grade. So number one, that gave me a unique perspective on what was going on, because I saw the top, I saw the bottom, and then I saw the top again while the school was kind of growing. And I knew that the whole system was kind of growing, the district as well, with the dual immersion programs. It was just unique that I happened to be on the same campus. And so, I got an email from HR saying, hey, you have good performance reviews over the years. Do you want us to send your name for principals to be hired again next year? And I said, yes, I'm really, nervous about not getting a job, COVID happening. I have got 2 kids. I was just being a human in addition to being a teacher. I was just trying to secure my job. And, I was reassured that, oh, yes, we'll send your name out, yada, 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 that kind of thing. Meanwhile, feeling just like completely overwhelmed by a sense of compassion and just ethics, I had to speak up and say, can someone explain this to me? This isn't right. These kids need more support. Something's not right here. And because I started asking questions about that, people told me that I shouldn't until I had tenure. And I said, well, I'm leave replacement. The union doesn't protect me. I can't file a grievance about any of these things, because if I do, then the word of mouth that's gotten me hired in the past is,
And why doesn't the union protect you? Why doesn't the union protect you?
Because they haven't really bargained for leave replacement teachers. And the way it kind of works is if you're a leave replacement teacher at the district, they don't have to rehire you. You're temporary. So the way you have to try to maintain your job year after year is you have to have a good reputation. You have to make sure that, someone will call their friend and say, hey, do you need a teacher? Hey, I know somebody. And then they'll call you last minute, and then bing, you get a job. It still works like that. And the union is supposed to make sure that doesn't happen, but it does happen. And
meanwhile, they're hiring people right out of school that have the right little designation after their name from whatever school sold it to them. And they come right on in. It's like, come on in. Oh, you got a job. And
fund their induction.
And fund that whole process. And they get to stay. And then they can the next year go, yeah, I dropped that. I'm not doing that anymore. And they get to stay.
After they get their permanency, they have the choice to post and bid to a new position. Yes. Yeah. And that's opening up a position that can only be filled by someone else with the same credential as them.
And there's no commitment on their part to make of because it was funded, their induction was funded, you got to do this 5 years, or you've got to do this for a certain amount of time.
The only one in the contract that has that a little bit is special education. I believe there's a 3-year bind on the special education, but nothing for the dual immersion or
And
science.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and guess that these people coming in, these new teachers who come in with this designation and they start going through that pipeline from based on union pay scale are cheaper than you. Is that
No,
correct? No,
no,
they're not. Okay.
No, because no, yes, they are. Yeah, I mean, you move up the pay scale. Like as a leave replacement teacher, I still move up yearly on the pay scale.
The reason I'm asking is that if you're, A, it's politically expedient because designations, and B, you've got budgetary issues, budget crunch issues. So you're like, all right, which ones are the cheapest teachers? Right?
That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I only ask because this happened to me. Like I've literally lived this experience, but 1990. Okay. Where you have more training, more experience. You've got, all your ducks in a row, and you end up assisting or being shuffled around and helping people who are less experienced and less educated than you are. The district brags about we've got these wonderfully trained people in the district, and you don't have a permanent position either. They can every year decide like, we want to keep you, we don't want to keep you, and extend you an offer. The person you've been helping make look good, they get to stay and they get to do whatever they want. Oh, and they'll pay for their master's degree. So like this happened to me. So I that's why I asked. I think the reason I bring this up is it just illustrates further how in public school settings in these districts that the incentives are not aligned with providing quality instruction to students. The incentives are aligned with shuffling human beings around to maximize the amount of, the spreading of the money. Okay, like you said, follow the money and the political power.
Yeah.
Right? Am I
Yes.
getting it? Okay.
Yes.
I've been just trying to educate people on this channel because they're kind of like, well, how do we do school reform? Whatever. Like, your biggest obstacle reform is the system itself.
Yes.
The system is set up and organized and structured in such a way. And it cracks me up because people are so ready to say the evil corporations and CEOs of corporations, it's so easy to blast on a corporation. It just exploits people and off the backs of people, whatever. And I'm like, interesting. Have you ever taken a look at how a school district is run? And that's your tax dollars.
Yeah.
So, you allegedly have some say, or, this is supposed to serve you, the taxpayer. Oh, P.S. the money was taken from you by force. You didn't get to choose. They just came at you and said, pay up now. And oh, by the way, your kid is required to go to not just school, but this one right here. In this location, this building with these people, etc. And if you don't like it, too bad, so sad, right? So the incentives are not in the place where the people are going to be held accountable by the end user, the kid, and the parent.
Yeah.
It's just not there.
No, and it's interesting because even, as a leave replacement teacher, like I was involved at my school site. I was on the SSC council. And it's like, well, why am I making decisions for this school if I'm not even guaranteed a job there? Why are you allowing leave replacement teachers to hold these quote unquote leadership positions in a school when they're not even, there's no incentive for me? Why would I care? Why would I do all that I'm not going to be at that school next year, and I don't even know if I'm going to have a job at the district if they decide they don't feel like hiring me, or I can't seem to somehow get lucky enough that I land a new contract at some grade level at some other site with some, whole group of different colleagues. There's no continuity. There's no way that anyone in a position like that can develop their skills as an educator over time and gain some momentum and consistency and relationships with families that really builds and strengthens a community. That's completely absent from the way things are run here. And that community building is essential for children. It's essential to have more than just a single family looking after their child. They need to know who their teachers are that are going to care for them while they are growing at that school. The kids need that expectation. That creates stability and trust, and it reduces anxiety. I mean, it's so important, and I just think it's such a shame that the district is run in a way where it does not embrace that. It's not set up to build that. It doesn't appear to strive for that. Mm-hmm. And that is what is the most outrageous thing to me. And a lot of people have thought that I'm just having a temper tantrum. Oh, she didn't get, this, whatever. She, boo-hoo, so sad. And I'm like, you know what? It is so not that. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the fact that the whole system is running in a way, and these children have names. My students had a name. Each 31 kids I knew and I cared for. And they're just being grouped together, and they need a voice. They need someone who's saying, hey, this isn't good for me. This isn't making me feel good. I don't feel protected. I don't know what to expect. I'm getting shuffled around. No one's speaking up for these kids, and they need a voice, right?
And their parents.
And so that's what's going on.
And their parents, especially if they are these people who, for whom English is not their first language, they were told, and especially in California, it's like, come to California, free school, here, come, right? And then you get there and it might be free, but you're not really getting anything. I mean, you're the person who's being shuffled around. And to your point, the kids who have the parents in the PTA, they're getting Spanish. Like, oh, bonus, I get to learn Spanish. And the kids who need to learn English are the ones teaching them. It's like they're used. It doesn't seem right. And I don't know. I mean, I guess people accuse me of like really trying to paint like a really dark picture, but I'm on the outside of it and you're still like closer to it. And so I'm hearing this and I'm like, this seems obvious to me that this is not set up for the kids. This is not set up to be first and foremost a learning environment for children. It sounds more like, I don't know. It sounds a little bit more like a jobs program.
Kind of. It's well-intended. I think it's well-intended. And it's one of those things where you have to step back from the situation a little bit further and to be able to see where it's actually not helping. Because it makes sense. Like, of course, everyone wants to enrich our schools with the arts and language and all these things. We want to be immersed in it. But at the same time, we have these standardized tests that we have to adhere to, and these numbers and these data and these numbers and this data and instructional minutes and equity. And so, we're getting information from the universities and whatnot on dual immersion programs. We're getting reports that this is what students need to be successful in a 21st century economy. So of course people want bilingualism, and that's fine, but we haven't fixed the more foundational problems yet. So if you're at a school site that you have to, teachers are pressured to adhere to certain test scores, and you're doing test prep and you're doing all these things, but you also have to adhere to the enrichment programs that are brought by the parent enriched dual immersion side, but yet there's no parent supporting that side. There's no instruction. So there's children who deserve to learn the arts and deserve to learn music and languages and whatnot, but they also deserve to read and write. They also deserve to have those foundational skills, and you can't do both. You can't do test prep and all these extras. And I mean, it's too much. You can't, it's spread too thin.
Well, yeah. And I mean, this is something that people struggle to understand about publicly funded systems in general, is you cannot possibly please all the people all the time. You can't. And when you are using taxpayer funds to pay for something, by law, it has to be equal. Like, everybody has to get access to the same things. Otherwise, it's a violation of their rights. And that's why Title I exists. But, when you start adding other things, all the basics get kind of watered down. I mean, you can't do all the things. There's one pot of money, right? And as creative as you want to be, I mean, labor costs money. Teachers cost money. Building space costs money. Materials cost money. So there's just a limited amount to cover all of this stuff. So something's going to give. And if you try to do all the things, when I used to work in consulting, we had a little triangle, and it was like, you could have it good, you could have it fast, or you could have it cheap, and pick two. And in the school district, it's always the cheap is going to always be necessary because there's a fixed amount of money. Yeah. You've got your budget. You can't go over unless you've got great boosterism in the district and people are raising money hand over fist. And that's where leadership comes in. When you have a solid superintendent, that superintendent goes out into the community, builds community relationships, builds private public partnerships to say, we need donations and we would love to have the arts. We would love to have music. We would love to have all these things, but our budget only goes so far. So we're going to help kids read and write, because that's really our mandate. Like, our mandate as a public school is literate people. They've got to go out someday and graduate and actually read. And then you can get private money perhaps into the district. But if that's not your thing, if you're not good at that, or you're not good at managing money, and you're not really good at shuffling staff around, and you're not really good at the job, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Just a thought. So what's your biggest concern as far as her going up the chain, up to DC? Incompetence or potential corruption, or both? Both. Okay. And what's the buzz? All this is rumor, of course. I don't know that much. But what do people in San Diego say about her? What's the local feeling about her?
The people that are in the know, the people who have dedicated themselves to learning about this, to seeing below the show. It's very easy to put on a show and everything's great, and the news media and this. People actually know the facts and are trying to hold the district accountable for more transparency and whatnot. They know. And the buzz is that, that she used coronavirus relief funding to hire a federal lobbyist, and then poof, all of a sudden, she's nominated for this administrative position when that money was meant for kids. And then, even the board was voting on this when there wasn't even the full information about it in there. So it was almost like $150,000 was being voted on to be spent when you go dig a little bit deeper, it wasn't even explained what the money was going to be spent for. So there's little bits and pieces of that kind of get washed over unless you're kind of banging on the door saying, excuse me, explain this, public records request, we want to see some proof. And so there are some very dedicated parent groups here that are just demanding that the district, be more transparent, because the concern is of this corruption, is of this, it's all about the money. Why is the money being spent the way that it's being spent? And is it going to students? Is it really benefiting these kids? Because that's who we need to be supporting.
Right.
And my concern is if she goes, to the national level, it's just going to follow suit with the same situation that we have here in San Diego. And, they may do a very good job of making everything look like it's great. But, when things kind of down the line unfold, it might get covered up again as to where the systemic problem really started, what was causing all of these chain reactions to happen. And it's just the decisions.
Yeah. So I did want to throw up for people, there is a website if you want to learn more about her. It's knowmarten.com. And this, I believe, is one of the sites put together by concerned people about this, right? Okay. And so what did you decide to do? So you said they were blacklisting you and they didn't want all these questions you were asking about your kids and the programs, just kind of getting. So what did you decide to do?
Well, what I decided was I filed 2 complaints with California Public Employment Relations Board. But I don't have a lot of faith in the judicial legislative process for any of this. I just wanted to educate the public. I just wanted to tell the truth. This is the experience. This is what's going on. We don't have time to go through this legislative process and prove this and prove that. We just need to get talking, and we need to start asking more questions. And we need, as parents, to come together and start demanding to really understand what's going on, because it's built against the kids in a lot of ways. And so that's essentially just what I decided, because my hands are tied. I can't do anything. I'm just one person. And, yes, they blacklisted me, and,
what does
they
that
won't
look
respond
like
to anything.
when they blacklist you and you're a lead replacement teacher? What does that look like? Like no one's calling, or you're asking and they're saying we don't want you? Like what's happening?
They just don't ignore me. They just stonewall me. After that email saying that they were going to send my name out to these principals, I never received another correspondence back from the district at all, from anyone. And I reached out multiple times at every level.
So it's like you just cease to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then later in the summer, I went through a back door and I emailed a principal privately and said, hey, I heard you had this open position, because I was doing everything I could to get a job. I'm like, I don't know, like, how I can get around HR. And she said, oh, I just want to let you know, your name wasn't on any of the lists that were sent to the principals, just so you know. And I was like, well, that's interesting. What changed? There's nothing bad in my permanent record. No one's told me about any complaints. Why did I get this email from HR that says that I was a good candidate and I would be on the first list? And then why did you not send my name out after you told me that you were? And now why are you not responding to me at all? Again, it just seems suspicious. I don't know. It's a big district, I understand. But from my personal experience, if I was teacher of the year at a school site and I've been an employee with positive service record for 7 years, I'm very consistent. I know a lot of people in the district. Why would you hire brand new people right out of college and not me with a contract after a pandemic? Like, I don't know.
Well, and especially when districts like San Diego are constantly talking about teacher shortages. We hear about it in the national news all the time of like, oh, we have a teacher shortage. Oh, we have a teacher shortage, terrible teacher shortage. And you never see any journalists digging in and saying, but what does that mean exactly when you say you have a teacher shortage? Like, can you quantify that? Like, how many open positions you're just sitting there going, please apply to be a teacher? Because you're not the first person I've met or spoken to who has said, I can't get hired. Right? I can't get a job. They're bragging about, or not bragging, they're complaining about teacher shortages. And then come to find out they're filling spots with like permanent subs and all kinds of goofy things. And then, master teachers and head teachers and lead teachers are like, hi, I'm here. Why aren't you hiring me? And it's like, what, who, what, what?
Yeah.
You can't get a straight answer. And what do you think that's about? Like, why would they say there's a teacher shortage?
I don't know. I don't know that I've really thought about it to that level.
Because it just seems like I hear it all the time. Nationally, we have a teacher shortage. And then even in big districts, we have a teacher shortage. And their classes are huge. We have these big we can't make, classes smaller because we don't have enough teachers.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't see that. I know that there's plenty of people that want to be hired, and
yeah, it seems very strange. The other thing that seems strange is the claims of lack of money. And you know why I say that, of course, because the pile o' cash from the multiple CARES Act appropriations is enormous. I don't know if you looked at it, but I did a couple of videos on my channel. There's actually a website that's somewhat hidden now. You have to dig and find it. And I think one of the only ways to get to it is through the description area, a couple of my videos. But there is a website where you can go and look. And I was looking just the other day. And I think that California specifically has spent less than 10%.
I know. I want that website. You've told me about that before. And I thought, oh, I should have gotten that URL from her.
Yeah, I'm going to
good information.
I can go find it because I saved it. And it's a CARES Act, the CARES Act relief fund or whatever. It's probably in my history. I'll see if I can grab it. But it's really interesting because, like I said, Betsy DeVos put up this website because she was sick and tired of hearing from people who are complaining there's not any money to help, and oh dear, we have all this need because of COVID. And so she was really tired of it. And she said, okay, I'm making a website and I'm going to show people what actually exists. Let's see if I can find it because I know that I did save it. And I went out and looked. So as soon as Biden took office, I went and looked because I wanted to see if they'd spent any more money since November. Because as of November, there wasn't even a state that spent half of it. It was just like the original outlay, the first outlay. And then it was gone. It wasn't on the homepage. And I had to search and search and search. And I searched that site. I searched everywhere. Could not find it. It was really hidden. So I had to go back to my own video that I made about it and find in the description section where I'd put the link. And it is here. Okay. So I'm going to open this up and get the link and I'll put it up for my audience. And we can show it on the screen too. We'll take a look at what California has done. So if I saved this link and here it is for any of you who want to check it out. But they were not, I'm like, what is going on? And I think I recently heard This is the link. Copy it down because honestly, you will have to hunt like mad to find it. So I'm going to blow this up and then
it's interesting that there's this information available too, because even as a teacher, I had no idea. I was convinced that there was always a budget crisis. I had no idea that there was just money sitting there, and yet they were still saying, we need more, until I started to get involved. And it does require effort to learn, it's a learning curve when you get involved in budget and line items and whatnot, but it's very
so first of all, let me just hide this junk because this is taking up a lot. So this is the Education Stabilization Fund website at the Department of Education, and at Betsy DeVos had it from as of November 30th or so. It was right on the homepage, like right there. And they even did like a whole press release and everything of like, you want to see where it is? There it is, And so I made a video about it saying, everybody who's whining about money, hello. And at the time, and again, it's caught for all eternity in my video that there was only like, less than 20 billion. It was, less. Now look, $67.5 billion with the B, $1 billion, right?
Wow.
And what you see here is, these are the states, and each of these sections is for a different ESSER is what would be relevant, I believe, to you, because that would be, I think ESSER is where you have like elementary and secondary, that level. So let's take a look at California specifically. Okay. The total Education Stabilization Fund awarded. That's a lot of numbers. That's a lot of numbers, isn't it? Right? Yes. So you can see what's awarded, and now you can see how much is spent.
Wow.
For the state of California. And then we scroll down a little bit more. Jeez. See, CARES Act funds spent. Oh, look, $653,671,350 spent of the what is that? There's $1,647,300. That's a lot of money, you guys. I mean, that's just a lot of money. Look at how tiny this little amount is. They've been awarded it. They had to apply for the grant. Somebody filled out the paperwork. Somebody said, send us money. Hey, mom, send money. Yeah, I'm going to post the link in the chat because I want you guys to have this. This is crazy.
It's really crazy.
Oh, wait, let me go back to that. That's the profile of California. Let me go backwards to the main. This is, and you go, if you want, go check and you'll see how hard it is to find on the actual Department of Education website. I suppose if you type in this exact thing, you might get it. But don't you think this would be an important thing for taxpayers to be able to find right off the homepage? Like a thing that says CARES Act spending, where's it going? But, it might be that they don't really want you to see look how light colored some of them doesn't bother me. The states that are open, the schools are open. They're not whining about money. They're not complaining like we can't open. We don't have enough money, right? I'm not that fussed about that. They didn't spend a lot of money. Now they've appropriated it in many cases. Like let's look at Florida. So they've certainly been awarded over $6 billion and they've only spent a tiny fraction of it, but they're also open.
I think San Diego Unified was the last school district to open any of their schools in the whole entire state of California.
Right. I mean, I don't love the fact that a lot of taxpayer money that, by the way, had to be printed, like we don't actually have it, but I don't love the fact that they're just, each of these states is just sitting there like, picking their teeth and looking at our money. I don't love that, but at least they're open. At least the schools are running, right?
Yes.
And in the case of Florida, at least they've banned critical race theory in the classroom, but that's a whole other conversation. But when you get to the states that still are not open, or they're only open part-time, or they're complaining endlessly about money. Well, you don't give us enough money. We don't have enough money. There it is, folks.
I would be interested to know the union
$67.5 billion.
I said I would be interested to know the union presence in those states. I'd want to see the data there because that has a big part of it.
Explain that to people how that works.
The unions?
Well, yeah, and as far as why you think it has a big part of it, in what, getting the money, not spending the money, spending the money?
Just politically, I don't know. Unions are so heavily Democratic. The National Education Association has contributed 97% of their political contributions to the Democratic Party since 1997.
I just saw an article just yesterday, that when the big debate was about reopening schools, suddenly the AFT in particular ramped up its donations. It just like started sending out checks. They spent, I think, what did I see? How many hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations? But it just, and if you think about it, out of their giant pocket, to send, $100,000 in donations, like all at once, spread around to different Democrats who are key to, these policies or whatever. It's really a drop in the bucket when you think about how this money might end up being spent in Union Stronghold.
And they control it, right? So for example, here in San Diego, the union gets the contributions from the teachers who are part of the union, and then they use some of that money to advertise whatever school board candidate the union wants, and then the public kind of sees that, and a majority of people don't pay that much attention, and so they just pick the name that they can see in the biggest letters that have been posted everywhere. And whether they're, Democratic or Republican, we're a 5-0 Democratic, we're heavily Democratic here in San Diego, to the point where there's like no Republican school board members, I don't think. Right. But anyway, they get put in, and then the school board picks superintendent in a closed door session violating the Brown Act. So it's like, well, and then this goes to the union, and then you ask the union, and then the union blacklisted me because they thought I was a troll when I just questioned, like, hey, teachers, look up Janus versus AFCME just so you know your rights, because they wouldn't have created Janus versus AFCME if the unions weren't politicized, but whatever. And right. Maybe the NEA and the AFT and perhaps the Department of Education is maybe unconstitutional because education is not even mentioned in the Constitution, and the 10th Amendment gave that power to the state. So I'm just trying to understand what all is going on. I'm just trying to, I don't have any answers. I'm just asking questions and trying to figure it out, because
no.
Like, don't add up in my mind.
You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to be inquisitive. Yeah. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to just do as you're told, show up and do your job. Don't ask questions. When they yank away from you, supports, or they put in place policies that make it hard for you to get, and keep a job because they've chosen some letters after someone's name or a specific designation is more important than actual quality. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been asked so many times, like, how do we get higher quality teachers in the classroom? How do we make sure that, because nothing impacts a child more, in my personal opinion, than the quality of that teacher in the room, the person in the room. And it's not, quality is a complicated algorithm. It's not just what letters are after their name. In fact, that's probably the smallest part of it. That may be important if there's specific training they have to have. But the most important thing, I think, is experience and actual building relationships. Like, how well do they connect with the families, with the kids? How well do they motivate the students to learn? This is an interpersonal relationship teaching.
Well, do you want to know what I think the answer is to that?
Tell me.
And this one, strength-based education. And I don't know if you're familiar with the strength-based education model. Have you heard of that before?
I just briefly, when we discussed it, because I've heard of other models, but tell me more about this.
So strength-based education is one where we find out and identify in a child what they're naturally good at and what they enjoy doing. And the teacher also gets to identify what that teacher's strength is. Some of us are better at language arts. Some of us are better at math. And we almost work as like a cohort where we're facilitating like a path of inquiry and exploration for these children. And instead of trying to force them to be something that they're not, finding out what they are. And because we just naturally feel good when we're good at things. And so when we're naturally good at things, imagine if you take these natural abilities that you came into the world with, and they're developed and they're fostered to be the best that they could be. You're productive. You're feeling like yourself. You're fulfilled, right? And then the teachers are feeling like they can do their job well because they're teaching what they love to teach. They're not trying to do so many different things. That I'm good at language arts, but I don't really know about math, and they're changing this, and I don't know what's going on. Everyone's so kind of just confused that a strength-based approach, it's student-centered. And it allows the adults to allow them to be kids, to grow into the adult that they're going to be, which is going to be happy and productive and
It's also
completely
how
who
we
they are.
actually behave as adults. We don't say, I really stink at math, but I think I'm going to go into a job that requires a lot of math. I mean, we're going to end up choosing our life path based on things that we feel we're pretty good at, we're successful at, we can be
Yeah.
successful. That's not to say that we don't, and I don't hear you saying this either, that we don't also make sure that we cover the subjects that they're not naturally good at or the things they're not naturally good at. It's just to say that when you meet a child where they are, and you capitalize on their strengths, you notice their strengths, and you try to leverage, because the strength is not necessarily just I'm good at language arts, just you're a kind of a word-based learner. You're somebody who likes to learn through the use of words and language and so forth. So when we have to approach math, for example, or something else, we're going to leverage that strength to teach you the things you're not naturally in love with. So as an example from my own life,
Yes.
I was terrified of math because I hadn't learned my multiplication tables in time to be shoved into the fourth grade a year ahead of when I should have been. And I was fortunate to get a tutor, and they worked with me with word problems and word stories. And I actually listened to Multiplication Rock, which is words. And I learned them lickety split because I was really good with words, but really stinky with linear equations. So that can really help you jettison ahead with a kid who's otherwise struggling if you figure out that type of thing. The other thing I noticed is I had a kid was really struggling with reading when I was teaching first grade, and he was really down about it. Like the kids, when they know they're not doing well at something, and it will affect their mood and their attitude in the classroom, it can cause behavior problems too. But he was a phenomenal artist. Like this kid was leaps and bounds ahead as in terms of fine motor coordination, his ability to even envision a work of art. I hope he went on to become an artist because he was brilliant. And I noticed it and I thought, okay, we're going to do big books. And I said, Stephen, you are the art director of this book. You're the guy, everyone listen to Stephen, and they loved him because it was so obvious to all the kids that he was so good. And he took it on, took it so very seriously. Like, okay, yeah. And he built up his confidence through art. And then when the finished book was there with the writing and everything, he was so excited to read it.
Yeah.
Even though he had to stumble through it more than the other kids, it didn't matter because it was his creation. So
exactly.
It's that I agree with you. I never had heard it called skill-based or strength-based rather, strength-based, but it makes so much sense. And how can you do something like that in a room where all the decisions about who's going to be where and teaching what and to whom and so forth are made by people so far away from the process?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the hard part is trying to create that vision, because some of it just has to give the trust back to the teachers that, to almost, you got to kind of break the barriers down a little bit and just let us be with the kids and just help them grow and just provide that love, because that's what teachers are. Like teaching's a calling. It's really not a career. You don't become a teacher because you get summers off. I mean, maybe some people do, but in general, I don't consider it a profession. I consider it a calling. And so all of this is never to come down on teachers or administrators or anything like that. We're talking about the higher level admins, right? Because anyone that's working with students has a heart for children. That's just
I would say that is probably true of why most teachers go into it. But I would also say that if you're looking at turnover, if you're looking at why people leave teaching, it's for the same reason. In other words, when you truly love kids and when you truly are in it for the right reasons to put the student first, I think you're the people who leave, because after a point, it's painful. Yeah. It's really painful. It's emotionally painful to not be able, your hands are tied, to not be able to do what you know is best. And because you're the first person that parent sees or knows about as far as in relation to their child, you're going to get all the blame when chances are it's not your fault. You're doing the very best you can with what you've been given and what's expected of you, which is increasingly more and more and more and more and more and more, right? And so on the one hand, like with the pandemic, I understood some of the teachers saying, you guys are asking us to do all these things. But the other hand, when I saw teachers who are attacking parents and criticizing parents and yelling at students and being disrespectful to students, I thought to myself, the incentives are designed almost now to where these are who stays. In other words, if you're the kind of person who could ever conceive of belittling parents, belittling students to their face, like all this kind of the system's set up to support you.
Yeah.
The system's set
To
up
protect you.
to protect you. The system is not set up to protect those of us who are going to break down in tears and say to the parents, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. This completely sucks. I don't want to be doing it this way. I love your kids. I want to do the right thing for your kids, and I can't. The system doesn't protect that person. God forbid if you said anything even hinted at that. And I think I told you when we talked on the phone, I told you about the story of my sister who, like, a teacher had to go like 2 towns away and have a private meeting in a Wendy's all in secret to tell her that her son had a learning disability that the district didn't want to test because they knew they didn't have supports. And they were going to be out the money from No Child Left Behind and having to send him to a special school. So she's like, psst, go get your kid privately tested. I'm really sorry. I can't help you. Bye. Like, what? And she was in a union district. Like, shouldn't the union be there to protect that person so when they want to do their job properly? So no, that's not what it does. They will go out of their way to blacklist you, like, rocking the boat.
They verbally attacked me on the CTA Facebook group by supposed teachers here. They literally called me. It was the most appalling thing I'd ever seen in my life. And then they blocked me. When I was just saying what I said before, the thing about the Janice, I was a union buster. I was all these things. And I was like, I'm just saying very like factual information here. And why are you calling me, a flea and a tapeworm? I'm like, and it was the most, I don't even have words for it. It was so insane.
But that's what I'm saying.
Believe it.
The good teachers, the caring teachers have a tendency to leave. And if they don't leave, they become, I think, I've known a few have done this. This is another option. They sort of just become reclusive, like inside their classroom. They just kind of only do whatever they can do in their classroom. And then they leave in that, like, that's it. They don't talk about anything. They don't have any friends. They don't, it's kind of like they're just in their walled little universe in their classroom. Yeah. But to your point, if you're in a role like yours where you're a lead replacement teacher, you can't even do that because you don't have a classroom. You don't have a place to call your own and like, this is my school, this is my classroom. And back when I was a kid, it was different state to state. But when I was a kid in the early years, I was in New Jersey. Then we moved to New York City, but we had neighborhood schools. So your school was there in your neighborhood and the teacher was the 4th grade teacher, or you might have 2, right, for each grade. And that's who the teachers were for that grade. It was like, that's what it was. Same with middle school. There was, there were like 2 or 3 science teachers, 2 or 3, and they were the same teachers year after year to the point where you could predict it. Like you knew looking ahead, you're like, oh, I'm going to have Mrs. just like you described.
Yeah.
And even though I hated public school for a lot of reasons, I do have some fond memories of a couple of teachers, like there were like those 2 amazing teachers that you had. And, but they were fixtures. In fact, I just looked up one of those favorite teachers. He was my history teacher in the one and only year of public high school that I had. And he passed away back in, I think it was the late 90s. And, but I looked up and there was, like plaque on the wall of the school. This was his classroom. Like the guy is like a known entity at the school to this day. And that doesn't seem possible anymore. It's just not run that way anymore.
No. And even at times, I think, even if they weren't the greatest teacher in the world, they were still a figure to our childhood. Like I remember in high school, I had a teacher at my school that was one of those figures. I think my mom had him for a teacher too. And he was very zany. He was a science teacher and he would like credit us with beetles and dots and like all these kind of funny things. You're like, what's Mr. Coburn doing? But those experiences, they might not be necessarily, academic in what he was teaching, but they're a part of shaping your character as a human and learning how to interact with people who are different than you and learning how to handle situations where you're like, I don't think they're supposed to be doing this right now. But it's an education in life in some ways when people are allowed to have this character that you can come to interact with and expect. You know what their character is, you know who they are.
Right.
So you can understand them on a deeper level instead of just constantly going like, I don't know who I'm going to get. I don't know who this person's going to be. It's just a different way of navigating life. I think I don't know.
Well, what's interesting is when I was in elementary school, there was no Department of Education. It didn't exist yet. And I've often wondered how much of an impact it has had, even though states determine, their education, but how much of an impact it has had having a cabinet level agency with appropriation capabilities and, the ability to award grants and all these kinds of things, how much that has done two things: built and strengthened the union power, because there's, again, even a bigger bucket of money. And, now they can lobby Washington, so as before, it's like you're just working at the state level to try to do what you're trying to do, like it's very fragmented. But it seems to me like unions have a lot more power if they can go straight to the top, right?
Well, yeah, and the DOE is like a data collection house. They're collecting all the data on all the demographics and all the kids, and so in the guise of needing to help and support the states that need the support, but it's also it's just like when you go to an internet website and they say, "Can you have your data?" They're just collecting data. They're just collecting data.
Yeah, you kind of wonder what they're using it for. What they're using the data for. Well, because
marketers use it.
Well, but if you're at the federal level, you can also use data if you wanted. I mean, I'm, again, just spitballing here, but if you wanted to start taking inventory of how many kids do we have out there who are, English as a second language learners nationwide, and where are they? And and how many kids are, so how many fall below the poverty line, and how many this and how many that? Because if, let's say, for the sake of argument, one of your goals was making sure that you had a sizable voting base that was favorable to your policies, and that, of course, would necessitate them not really knowing English very well, because then, when you can read and you can do math really well, that you can ask too many questions, right?
This goes back to the human missile crisis too in Miami-Dade County. I need to do more investigation there. I did it a couple months ago and I kind of dropped it, but I need to go back because it has to do with exactly what you're saying too. There was something there. And even Herman Padilla he was from Puerto Rico. He was the first congressman from Puerto Rico to move all the way up. He began his career as a Democrat and being very pro this bilingualism. But as time went on, he changed parties, towards the end of his career. And it's just an interesting story to investigate and learn more information, because it might help explain what you're saying here as well, as to how did we get to where we are right now is really, and why, right?
Yeah, to the point where we're now having a discussion about a bill or an act that would take $1 billion more and be, make it available to grants. Uh-oh, we lost our connection. Where did she go? Oh dear. We lost Caitlin. Hopefully she will be back shortly. But what I was going to say is that the Civics Secures Democracy Act is what I'm talking about. And what happened? Let's see where she went. And that would send up $1 billion more out to the states, but this time very specifically for putting things like anti-racism and critical race theory into the curriculum. In fact, it's specifically named. All right, here she's back. Oh, there you are. What happened? Just dropped connection. Okay.
It just dropped, and so yeah, I had to steal my VPN, and now I'm back.
Yeah, I think your mic went off too, but that's okay. So what I was mentioning was that Civic Secures Democracy Act, where if that passes and they get $1 billion more at the Department of Education, and what people don't really know necessarily is that it's not the guy at the top. It's not the Secretary of Education who will decide who gets those grants and so forth and so on. That's the deputy. The deputy is the person who's more in charge of like the day to day. And I think, so, what I'm concerned about somebody like Cindy is that if she's in any way, shape, or form compromised, or a person who, might have been chosen because like they know they can, it's the deputy's responsibility to make sure the president's agenda is realized in education around the country.
Yes.
Put very simply, that's the deputy's job. They're the ones boots on the ground, or not so much boots on the ground, but they're the ones like day to day. Whereas the secretary kind of, does more of the outreach and the PR and, the high level stuff. But it's
things,
yeah. But the deputy is the person who's more doing the actual making sure that when, for example, if they got that money, making sure that they're spending it in the ways that they want them to spend it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they want them to spend it in very specific ways, which is on these kinds of things. And one of the things is what they call action civics, which means giving credit for protesting. Course credit.
What?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry. If you are active in democracy, participating, now they can't vote. So how else do we participate in democracy when we are underage? Protest. Or work for someone's campaign or whatever. Now, I'm pretty sure that we shouldn't be giving course credit for kids going out and doing political action at the behest of their teachers.
And I think our teachers raise them to comply. Now we're giving them credit for being rebellious. I don't understand. It's not.
Well, do you really think the teachers are going to give them credit if they decide, okay, I'm going to a reopening protest from lockdowns. I'm going to an anti-mask protest. Can I please have course credit for that? You think that's going to work? I'm going to a pro-life protest. I'm going to go join the Catholic school kids and we're going to go protest for life.
Right.
Do you think they'll give them course credit for that? Or do you think they'll give a course credit for joining BLM in a march down the street?
Yeah, the previous one, you might end up in an empathy class or something because you're not to get re-educated.
Or needing some restorative.
I don't want to go there.
Justice. Yes. So this is where I'm highly skeptical about the choice. Aside from the incompetence, aside from the questionable ethics, I'm concerned about the politicizing of the Department of Education. Was always a political thing. I believe it was a gimme back to the unions for helping Carter get elected. That is my belief. I cannot prove it. I am stating that as my opinion. Anybody can challenge me if they want. I am just saying that's my opinion. Because the unions got exponentially stronger after there was a Department of Education with a budget. So in any case, now that they want to appropriate funds, not just for special ed, and now you've all seen how much money is sitting in a giant pot for COVID relief. And remember, the COVID relief funds are not just for buying plexiglass and sanitizers. They said they would have budget shortfalls because with the shutdown, so many people's businesses, their tax revenue went through the floor, right? So they had some problems with collecting revenue in these states. They had budget crunches because of everything being shut down. And so that money, to keep schools functioning, they needed money just to keep the schools functioning. And yet, in the places that got the biggest grants, the schools are still not 100% open. The unions are still saying it's not safe. It's not safe. And now they're lobbying for childcare. Now they're lobbying for money on top of that for childcare for them after they displaced people from their jobs. So, anytime somebody tells you there's not enough money, you need to just say,
all that.
Really?
Well, and it even goes to the labor unions too. Like even here in San Diego, Richard Barrera, I think has created this thing where, we can't hire any district labor that's not unionized, right? And so that creates a situation where people can't really bid on jobs. You're not getting, the best contractors on a timely basis, so there's just, it's all about the money and at every level. And even at the smaller level, but the bigger level, it's just the way that it's being spent really needs to be, looked at again carefully by the public, because at this point we can see even the elected officials are not making the choices that are in the best interest of the kids. They're not spending our tax dollars in a way that I think is feasible it's just wasteful, or it's just sitting there to do what? Gain interest on some fund, and then where's the money going that they're gaining on? I want to know more. There needs to be more transparency across the board of what is going on with all this money. It's very suspect, all of it.
It is very strange. And I think that what I'm trying to do with this channel is just raise questions. So I have people on like you, or I put up the CARES Act site, and I just, as a concerned, taxpayer, parent, homeschooler, ex-teacher, et cetera, I'm just saying, what's this all about?
Yeah, because we
what
don't
I've
know
noticed,
really, but
what I've noticed is a lot of a lot of parents are just so busy trying to just get through the day. They're trying to keep their job or get a job or manage their own households, and then they're being bombarded morning, noon, and night, 24-hour news cycles, social media, et cetera, with all kinds of things like look over here so you don't look over here. And so I'm trying to be over here, or I'm trying to compete with the while they're busy talking about that, what you're not noticing is all this money, all this that is just sitting. It's not in the economy doing any work. It's not in your pocket. It's not even in existence. It's fake. It's imaginary money, right? But it's just been sitting there. Now, I heard the other day that they're now not going to spend it this year at all. They have no intention of it. They're going to spend it over like 5 years. How do you know? I mean, is this part of the, we know we're going to have a shortfall for 5 years? Fine. Explain that to people. And this also goes to journalists. Anybody out there know a journalist that covers education? Where are you people? Where are you people for the people? Because I really feel lately like journalists work for the government. They are there to say, here's what the government told us in the press release of what they're doing. And I don't see anybody investigating. I don't see anybody saying, why is that? Wait, why are you taking 5 years to spend it when the schools aren't open? Can you open the schools? What is it going to take? You have the money. Open this.
I feel like that's us. We're the investigators. We're the ones who are kind of having to do that now.
That's it.
Even though we're not journalists.
That's it. We are the ones that have to do this. And that's, like I said, that's why I have these live streams. That's why I bring guests on to talk about their perspectives. Why people want to hear. They're like, can you get some teachers on to tell us what life is like for a teacher? Because they'll go on Twitter, and the people who are very vocal or Twitter teachers now are like, these parents, and they're not hearing from you, and they need to hear from teachers who actually love their children.
Well, that, and I love my colleagues too. And the hardest thing about all of this is I've kind of been vilified by people that I used to care about. Relationships were severed because it could have been my approach and how I went about things, which is, certainly part of the problem, I would imagine, but also just, they were incapable or unwilling to see things from my point of view. And almost like I've never attacked my fellow teachers or colleagues or administrators. I'm saying we're all victims of this, from right down to the, site level employees and whatnot, to the teachers, to the students. This is who we're standing up for and we're fighting for, because of the higher levels that are not working with students. There's, like you said, the CEOs. They're the people running the company. They're the ones who we need to hold accountable for the people that actually are here because we care about the students. And so
they pay no price.
Yeah, well, and it's a shame that other teachers don't would look at someone like me, who I'm really fighting for, as though I'm attacking them or something, and I'm not. I'm just trying to ask questions. I'm trying to help you guys ask questions. I'm really trying to improve the whole system that we have.
If they went into teaching for the same reasons you did and I did and so forth, then they would want, in my opinion, they would want school choice, because school choice is not just for children, it's for teachers too. It's for teachers too. The more schools there are where you could work, that could potentially value you and restore your professional autonomy to you, and and pay you decently, or pay you merit pay. Like, you work harder, you get paid more. I mean, if there really were proper school choice where the money followed the kid. So I'm not even talking vouchers where the state goes, here you go. No, I mean, you keep it. And then teachers would have more choice too for where you're going to work. As it is now, you're stuck. You're like, if they don't hire me, I either got to make my own job, I'm going to make my own school, which we'll talk about in a minute. Or I've got to, hope that there's a private school or somebody else and they don't pay as much, usually the private schools. So, part of why they don't and why they can't and so forth is that parents who are going to private school are paying twice. They're paying in taxes and then they're paying for the school. So they have smaller budgets. So people don't realize those rich private schools. I suppose if you're talking about the ones with giant endowments and, like New York City and places like that, but your average parochial school or your average local private school does not have a giant endowment. And so, school choice is also for your colleagues. It's for the kids, and it's competition. So it seems patently obvious to me why unions and and loyal union members and, so even administrators, why they're against it. And Democratic politicians seems obvious why they're against it. It would dry up their union fund, union contributions. So,
Yeah.
but they give all these bogus reasons. Oh, it takes money away from the public school. I'm like, and this is bad. Why? First of all, it doesn't. That's a lie. But even if it did, why are they entitled to get this tax money when they don't do the job? It is the only area.
Well, no, I was going to say, I mean, everything you're saying, even as leave replacement teacher, I spent my own money on my classroom multiple times, setting it up to get stuff for kindergartners, and then setting it up to buy books for a library for fifth graders because they're not the same. And then I have to fund my own induction program to prove my competency to the state with a credential and a master's degree. I already paid $30,000 for. And I live in San Diego in the community where I worked, and I could barely afford my rent. That I can't literally afford to clear my own credential. And so I was hoping to get a permanent contract with the district so that I could benefit from that. It's what's up with the money? It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, a teacher should be able to live with 3 minutes away from the school that they work at, which I did, and be able to afford rent and be able to clear my credential, because my credentials are going to expire in October. So it's not even like I could continue teaching anyway, because it's all money. It all comes down to this crazy financial situation.
It's yeah. I mean, so I guess my message to parents is, I'm sorry to say, because you would love to have it be a set it and forget it situation, but if you think about it, it really shouldn't be. I mean, it's your children's education. It's literally the most important investment that they're making in terms of time of their life. They're spending 13 years of their lives, their entire childhood in these buildings with these adults. And I think we need to step back and think about that for a minute. They're compelled to be there. We compel them, and the state compels us to compel them. They go, they spend all their waking hours away from us and our influence with these total strangers who, may or may not have their best interests at heart. Okay. Increasingly, not so much. And that's on top of the money that they're confiscating from us for the privilege of being forced to send our kids to these buildings with these strangers who may or may not have our kids' best interest at heart. I think it's high time that we put as much thought into that as we do into buying a car. Yeah. Think about the effort you put into like searching for your car, used or new, going to different dealerships, test driving different things, being super skeptical about the car dealer when they promise you the world, or buying your house. We think about, is it a good district? The realtor goes, oh, totally. It's so awesome. It's a great district. And you ask, well, how do you know it's a good district? Oh, the test score, very high. Everybody moves here. Property value is very high. Must be a good district. Yeah, that has nothing to do with it. Like nothing to do with it. And so, and also what was a good school district 5 years ago, and that's why the property values are up, because perception lasts longer than reality, may not be anymore. So parents, this is going to be one of those things, like you sat down and figured out where you're going to live. You sat down and figured out, what house to buy, what car to buy, or what apartments to rent, or what job to get. You need to look at your schools, your school boards, all of the curriculum with as much, if not more, actually more, because the people who have your children in their custody all day, they have these little minds, right? I mean, what gets said to a child in a classroom can last a lifetime. So I want to talk I know we're coming up, we've been talking a long time, but I want you to talk about what you are hoping to build yourself. Because one of the other things that I've been talking about on my channel is personal empowerment. And, for parents to think about it, but also for other teachers. So if there are teachers who watch this, if not today, but in the replay, and they think like you, and they're like, yeah, I want to help kids. I want to do better. And, what are some things you're hoping to do on your own?
I want to build my own curriculum, education model, a curriculum for my own education model that kind of lends itself to like Maria Montessori, but not. I like the Reggio Emilia method. And I think we need to use, things that worked in the past, and we need to figure out how to unite it with things in the future, with this 21st century. Because in part of my research, I learned that the kids in our elementary schools right now, they're called Generation Alpha. They're the I generation is what they call them, because the iPad came out in 2010. And they're the first generation of children born entirely within the 21st century. And so when I did my research on these kids, I was expecting to hear like, oh, they're not going to make eye contact, they're going to have social problems, screen. You know, I was expecting to have all these negative projections for them. But what I found is that these kids actually are predicted to be the healthiest, the wealthiest, and the longest living generation yet. But that has to do with if they're getting the right foundation with their education. They need different sets of skills. They need different sets of supports to thrive in this 21st century world. Now, since we're so inundated with screens at this point, you know, I want to have a school where children are away from screens. They get enough exposure at home and in their regular environment. So at school, they use their hands, they have the creative play, you know, they have that more Montessori method. And then we start to incorporate the information literacy and the technology literacy and that kind of thing in the middle school ages. And then, you know, as they develop and as they've learned their foundational skills, then we start to foster these kids on paths of their own choosing, and they get to pursue things that they want, because it's really about that unity. It's not about choosing one or the other method, but it's about looking at, you know, where we've been, where we're going, you know, connecting to nature, but also using technology. We have to figure out a way that we can unite everything instead of being divisive with it. And that way everyone can flourish. So that's what I'm trying to build.
It also seems to me that if kids only exist in a virtual world or do too many things online or do too much of the learning online, and I liked what you said about being connected to nature, you know, the solutions to big problems, let's say it's, you know, climate change or something like that, the solutions to the big problems we face and, you know, keeping ourselves energy independent as a nation, making sure everybody's fed, making sure we have enough medicine and healthcare without turning to government to give to us, right? But actually coming up with solutions that make these things more effective, more readily available, less expensive, all the things that we want them to be, means that you're going to have to get in touch with the tangible world. You have to be able to be as comfortable in the world of flesh and blood people as the virtual world. And you need to be able to have an understanding, a working understanding of how things work, where stuff comes from, right? Mm-hmm. I see a lot of kids who are now sort of in their early, like preteens and teens, where they've spent almost their entire time in school on Chromebooks. They're like the generation of Chromebooks. And they've been in the classroom, they've been on technology. So it's not new. I keep telling parents, like, I hate to break this to you, but your kid's been on an online in the classroom for a long time. This is not new this year. The only thing new is that the teacher is now behind a screen too. Yeah. But when I've been tutoring and doing different things, and I talked to them about stuff in the world, like why there was no toilet paper in the store suddenly, or why we didn't have as much meat as before, they were absolutely baffled about where things come from. It's almost like these things just show up at the store, don't they? They're just there.
Yeah.
Because they go online. It's like, oh, their stuff. I can order it online. I'm like, do you have an understanding of like that those used to be trees? And just yesterday, I saw a Twitter feed, kids, I'm not exact. At first, I thought it was a joke. Like, this can't be real. But it was just tweet after tweet after tweet. And after a while, after 50 of them, I'm like, this is not fake. At least some of these people are real. Figuring out, they were in their later teens, that meat was animal muscle. They literally had no idea where meat came from. And so and I'm thinking about it, I'm going, yeah, I actually strangely am not that surprised. There are kids.
I never thought, you don't think about it. Like, you're just like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. How would you learn that if you're not taught it?
If you weren't explicitly taught it. So if everything you're taught, and there was such a push to like 21st century, it's technology and everything's technology. But there's been so much talk about so many subjects that are disconnected from the tangible physical world. And when you add to that this push to college, like, no, you're not going to go to trade school. You're not going to become an electrician. You're not going to become a plumber. You're going to they don't even mention it. There are kids who go their whole education and they don't even know how stuff gets fixed if it's broken. Okay. They don't even have any connection to that. So, the first time they might realize that there are people who fix cars is if one of their family cars breaks down. But if you live in a city and you don't have a car and you take public transportation, it's like a mystery to you that things even ever get fixed. If things break, you throw them out, get a new one. Things break, throw it out, and get a new one. And I don't think people are thinking about that enough.
No, it's because we have this achievement situation. Kids like to learn like that. They want to be helpful. They want to solve problems by nature. That's what they enjoy.
They like taking
doing
stuff apart and seeing how it works. And if you don't capitalize on that in the early grades, look, I'm a huge proponent of literacy, but you can't make a kid spend 8 hours a day focusing on literacy either. You got to spend your time on it, but then you've got to let them take things apart and break things and put them back together and see how stuff works. Bring back shop class, bring back cooking, bring back sewing, bring back all these things that they're not gender specific. They're life skills, for crying out loud. Plant a garden, dig it up, whatever. But these are and this is why, as a proponent of homeschooling, I'm trying to explain to people that, homeschooling isn't sitting at your kitchen table on a computer necessarily, or always being in your house. It's just giving yourself an opportunity with your kids to explore things they aren't going to see inside a typical school. Like, hey, let's go in the garage and we're going to open up the hood of the car and we're going to talk about what's in there. Yeah, we're going to look at that and see how that works. Okay? Yeah, because you know how the car moves? It's not magic. It's not fairy dust. There's actually, parts that are mechanical. You know what? We got an old toaster. Let's undo the screws, take it apart. Look at this. See these coils? They heat up. They connect to electricity. Let's play with it. So these are things you can do. You have the luxury, whether it's on a Saturday or a Sunday or whatever, but because you're in the mindset of I'm educating my own kid, so it doesn't have to be Monday at noon or whatever, you can do this. Or in a small micro school, like if you create your curriculum and you manage to find, let's say, a dozen students or something, and they want to come learn with you and do things your way, you can do that. You can do whatever you want because it's yours. You figured it out. And I'm trying to encourage people, yourself included, to go for it. Just go for it, because I know in my heart there's a market for this, that there are parents out there who are like, that sounds awesome. I know my kid would love that. My kid doesn't want to sit and just stare at a screen all day. My kid's squirrely and wants to go outside and run around, and, or I don't really see, my child is so mechanically inclined. And in some cases, these kids really are into this stuff pretty early, that I don't want them just stuck in a building all day. The
way I see it is what you're saying is I think all children have genius locked inside, and they're all their own kind of gemstone. And it's our job as parents and as teachers to mine the gemstone out and then identify what it is and then shine it to its full brilliance and then bring that into the world. Because by nature, I believe as human beings that the spark of being human is to create and to express ourselves. And if we don't give children this ability to express, whether they express themselves through cooking or through language arts or through mathematical equations or through code, whatever their style of expressing who they are is, if we don't give them the ability to do that, we are stifling a human being, and that's wrong. And so all these things that you're talking about, they're just, there's not even a certain niche or type. It's just naturally all human beings want to do those things. It's just who we are as a species. Right.
And even if let's give, the system, I mean, systems aren't people, but let's give all the people involved with the system the highest benefit of the doubt you can give them. The task they've taken on is incompatible with what we just described. So, even if I can't convince people that critical race theory and anti-racism and all the woke nonsense and all of this push towards this gender whatever, even if I can't convince people that is toxicity writ large, okay, that is just child abuse of forget it. It's enormous. Even if we move that out, even if, if that's not your thing, even if we get past the rising rates of illiteracy and they're not using reading science to teach reading, even if we took that out, the system is not designed to even find your child's brilliance. There's no incentive for them to do it. They can't. Yeah. Any system that has to serve 100% of the people who show up at the door, no matter what, exactly the same way, or else it's a violation of law, guess what the service is? The service is like the bare minimum we can do and still call it equal. And that's why this equity push is so dangerous, because if now you're talking about we've got to have equal outcomes of this horrible system that provides equal stuff in the first place, all you can do, I mentioned it some of the other day, you cannot get equity in your grass and your lawn with fertilizer and water. There's only one way you can, with a lawnmower. Oh, we achieved equity. So what are the kids what are they going to get when they have to have equal outcomes? We get rid of grades, so we don't really know that an A isn't an A anymore. And we just keep lowering the ceiling and lowering the ceiling and lowering the ceiling. Go, look, equal. They're all equally not prepared for life.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to come to the table and reevaluate how we assess success, right? Student success. But it's just a conversation that we need to be active and involved in and come together as parents and as stakeholders in all of this, because the way I will describe the unions and all of this is we needed the scaffolds for progress. It was like having a cast on. But there comes a point when the cast or the scaffold is no longer helpful. It's a hindrance. And so you need to take it off and you need to restructure it in a different way. Like, we have to always be adaptable. And we're still trying to adhere to this traditional system where it's, 9 months in one grade level, and then you have to achieve this milestone. It's this very linear climb, when it's got to be more of almost a spiral. It has to be more fluid, particularly for these kids that are coming into this generation now, because they're going to develop differently. Their evolution is different. Even the development of their brain based on early screen exposure, it's where they're physically being wired differently. And so we have to use some foresight and be able to understand that this is where we're going, so that we can put the right scaffolds in place to support these kids. But if we're still hung up on this old system, we're going to fail this entire group. 15 years is one generation. We're going to fail a bunch of kids. We can't do that. So
it's not changed since it was created. Yeah. We're talking about an industrial revolution system that was put in place because we had a lot of immigrants coming to the country who didn't speak English and were Catholic. So we, couldn't have that, couldn't have them, know these papists. We got to assimilate them. So there was some xenophobia involved. And then we had freed blacks coming up from the South and to work in factories. Well, got to make sure that everybody's, and people don't believe me when I say that, but it's I literally have this quote on my desk so that I don't lose it. This is Woodrow Wilson. And he's speaking to New York City School Teachers Association in 1909. We want one class of persons to have a liberal education, and we want another class of persons, a very much larger class of necessity in every society, to forego the privileges of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult manual tasks. To teachers at a teacher's college. And there's more in this book. This is, by the way, John Taylor Gatto, Dumbing Us Down. Highly recommend. But we haven't changed it. So it was initially, if you conceive a system for the wrong reasons, because I don't think that's the right reason to educate the public. And if it's conceived in a kind of with almost an evil intent, I don't think that's good intentions. I really don't. Then how do you change it into something that serves good intentions? You can pour all the wonderful people in the world into it. You can say these people all have great intentions, but the system is the product. The system is the thing. So
I totally agree with you.
I feel like what you've just described to me is kind of not to belittle your experience, but your experience sounds to me like a fairly typical 7-year period in the life of a really caring, well-intentioned teacher who tried to work in the public school system. And the details will be different for every person, but I think you're going to end up with very similar tales of this didn't really make sense to me. And then I asked questions and oops, that was the wrong thing to do. Or I got wind of how I shouldn't ask questions. So I kept my mouth shut. I stayed in my room and I just kind of hoped for the best and counted the days, the years, the months till retirement.
Yeah. And that's not fair to the teachers. That's not a life.
No, that's not a life.
That's not a way to live.
No,
that's not a way to work. So it's not even just the kids, it's for the teachers too. It's all so wrong. It's all so wrong.
So what's your parting comment for parents, or for like, what would you like people to take away from your experience or your thoughts on all of this?
That we have to be brave and courageous for our kids, and we need to really just stop thinking that we can't make a change, because we are the ones who have to change it, because the system's not going to fix the system that broke it, that was built and designed to do this. No. And we've been so conditioned to think that we have no power, and yet we do. And so it's just to believe in your power as an individual, and to believe in the power of humanity, of the human heart, and come together as a people for our kids and create real change in a timely fashion, because we can do it, but you have to think outside the box. You have to educate yourself on it. And you have to just take what, Deb and I are talking about and saying, and then do your own research and draw your own conclusions. We're not telling you what to think or anything. We're just talking. We're having a conversation. We're sharing kind of what's going on in our minds, because we're all a community of lifelong learners here, together. And as long as we're open and can work together, it's for the kids.
Exactly.
Basically.
Well, I can't possibly top that. I have nothing to add to that. That was just beautiful. So,
okay.
Thank you for
having me.
All of this. This was great. And I really appreciate your input. And as far as the Cindy Martin's thing goes, I guess the only thing we can say is, because we don't have like specifics, folks, what we have is questions. Our point to you is, please go to that website. Let me put it up again so you can see, because I want you to educate yourself so you can get involved and, make your voices heard about her. At a minimum, I think we've both come away with the impression that she does not have the chops for the job. It's too important a job. And we have some concerns about her ethics and where she's at politically, as far as, party above the kids. The person in this role needs to be for the kids, not for the party.
Well, and some of the issues that I didn't touch upon, that I don't feel comfortable touching upon, some of the issues that have been brought up about Ms. Marten are they have some criminal nature to them. That's worth looking into. I don't know a lot about, but if you go to this website, there are others who know more about it. So there's deeper concerns than we've even touched upon in this conversation. So
exactly. So just please, make yourself aware and use your own voice and comment. Call, she's going to the Senate next. So call your senator and let them know that you have serious concerns. The deputy spot is very important. It's really important. Now, if she does get confirmed, and if this bill does pass, it's still not over, guys. Those funds have to be applied for. All right. So that's at the state level. So then it's just like we learned all year. Who your governor is so important, okay? Because your governor has a lot to do with who your board of education is. And while it's not always a given, if you have an awesome governor, you're going to have a good board of education, you need to pay very close attention to your state politics, to your board of education, who those people are. And because those are the people who are going to try to get that money. Okay. And there are different people who can say no. The governor can say, I'm not asking for it because I don't want the strings attached. I don't want to have to use it on 1619 project in my schools in my state. I'm not going to do CRT in our classrooms in this state. So if these things pass, and I do say go do the public comment on those, as well as looking up Ms. Marten. But even if she gets this job, as bad as that is, you still have the power. First of all, you can always get your kid out of there and don't have to, worry as much about your child, because your child's not a lab rat. They don't need to wait while you're busy banging on doors. But also, you can make sure that you elect people in your states who are solid on how bad critical race theory, all this other junk, 1619 project, how bad that is for your kids. Because if she gets in, guaranteed, that's going to be pushed. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for coming. I'll see you in the backstage thing after. All right. Okay. Bye.